Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into something complex. President Trump's plans for the federal workforce. It's a story with big announcements, but also, well, lots of legal fights and some pretty confusing data points. Our job here is to try to untangle it all for you.
Exactly. It's not just about the numbers announced, is it? It feels more like uh, a real tug of war. You've got the administration's vision, then the legal system pushing back, and reports going in different directions. We need to see what's actually happening on the ground.
Absolutely. So let's start with that initial vision. The scale announced was, frankly, huge. Sources mentioned over 744,000 federal job sets planned for the first half of 2025, and nearly 40% of those apparently tied to this new Department of Government Efficiency. DOGU.
That's right, DOGE. And reports suggested managers appointed by Elon Musk were involved in overseeing that part. It was meant to be broad. We're talking plans reaching across, what, over 20 agencies? Yeah, things like up to 61,000 possibly at the Department of Defense, maybe 20,000 at Health and Human Services, even 3,400 from the Forest Service. The goals seem to be a pretty dramatic reshaping.
A dramatic reshaping indeed. But, okay, here's where it gets really interesting. That was the plan. How quickly did things actually move? And what about those legal roadblocks?
Well, that's the key thing. The administration pointed to that Supreme Court ruling on June 27th, seeing it as a win for their authority. But it turns out lower court injunctions kept blocking most of the big agency-wide cuts.
Okay, like what specifically?
Well, for instance, the American Federation of Government Employees, the AFGE, they won a preliminary injunction on June 30th. It was against an executive order trying to end collective bargaining rights. The judge actually called that move likely illegal.
Likely illegal, so a major hurdle right there.
A big one. And then just days later, July 1st and 2nd, you had a federal judge out in California. That judge temporarily blocked about 20,000 planned cuts at Health and Human Services. The reason given was procedural unfairness, basically saying proper steps hadn't been followed.
So ambitious plans meet legal reality. And that brings us to the numbers themselves, which seem, well, confusing. Reports from around July 3rd gave very different pictures of the workforce size, didn't they?
They really did. It's quite the puzzle. You have the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. Their report from June 29th showed a relatively small net shrinkage since September 2024, about 23,700.
Okay, modest.
But then Reuters reported a net loss closer to 60,000 federal positions. And to make it even murkier, Newsweek and Yahoo had figures suggesting maybe 73,000 added jobs in June, or perhaps only that 23,000 shrunk number we saw from OPM.
So the data is just all over the map.
It really highlights how hard it is to track these things accurately in real time, especially with such big policy shifts in a huge, complex system.
And behind the numbers and the legal fights, what are we hearing about the impacting people and, government operations?
Well, critics are definitely raising red flags. Our sources mention warnings about service disruptions. For example, concerns that 1,300 CDC staff cuts could slow down pandemic readiness, or that 3,400 Forest Service layoffs might hit fire prevention efforts hard, especially now, heading into peak summer.
Right, the timing couldn't be worse for fire season.
Exactly. And you also see the human side. CNN analysts pointed this out, and we saw images, like from that Chicago job fair on June 26th. It underscores that these aren't just numbers. These are people suddenly looking for work, facing real uncertainty.
So stepping back from the day-to-day, what's the core argument here? Why pursue these cuts according to supporters, and what are the main worries from the other side?
Okay, so supporters often point to fiscal savings, right? Potentially billions saved each year by trimming roles they see as non-essential. It ties into that smaller government philosophy, aiming to reduce bureaucracy and maybe signaling a pro-market stance to encourage private hiring.
And the counter-arguments.
Critics focus heavily on the risks. Operational dangers if key roles are cut, plummeting morale among remaining staff, and potentially serious gaps in public services. Think public health, safety inspections, things like that. It's really that tension between perceived efficiency and operational continuity.
And the media coverage itself became part of the story, didn't it? I remember CNN's initial banner.
Oh yeah, the breaking news banner when Trump first announced the plan. It definitely framed it as a huge layoff announcement.
Very dramatic.
It was. But interestingly, pretty quickly, their own anchors started adding nuance, mentioning that, not all cuts would happen at once because of things like probationary periods or, crucially, those court injunctions we talked about.
So a walk back of sorts.
You could say that. And apparently it came after an internal memo from their CEO, Mark Thompson. cautioning staff about overusing the breaking news label, worried it was losing impact. Sources even mentioned CNN started internal retraining on using it, partly due to viewer feedback. It really captures that debate. Sensationalism versus substance.
This has certainly shown just how layered this whole situation is. It's moving fast, it's tangled up in court. There's really no simple scorecard for how big the changes truly are right now or what the long-term effects will be.
Absolutely not, and maybe that's the key takeaway here. This deep dive shows more than just a policy fight over government size. It also reveals that constant challenge of how complex politically charged information gets filtered, reported, and then how we as consumers of news make sense of it all. So the question for you to think about is, beyond the headlines, what does this ongoing battle over the federal workforce really signal for the future of vital public services? And maybe more importantly, how do you navigate these mixed signals and the constant stream of breaking news to figure out what's actually going on?